In 1992, director Francis Ford Coppola directed his own adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, featuring an all-star cast that included Gary Oldman, Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder and Anthony Hopkins. This promised to be one of the biggest and most faithful screen adaptations of Dracula to date. But Coppola's version did take some of its own liberties. It added an extra layer of eroticism and sensuality. Coppola was also insistent that he didn't want to use any kind of contemporary visual effects, and instead only used antiquated special effect techniques from early cinema, including matting, rear projections, and forced perspectives. This gave the movie a unique, timeless quality, something that almost feels as if it could have been made in the early 20th century. But it also felt as though it had borrowed elements of every Dracula adaptation that had come before. The striking, nightmarish visuals of Nosferatu, the charismatic but terrifying central performance akin to Lugosi or Lee, and the sensuality and romanticism of John Badham's 1979 film. The result was one of the most striking and successful Dracula adaptations to date, and one that has not been matched in the last 30 years.
I am black.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the vampire, and we discuss Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Welcome to my home.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 8th series, exploring the evolution of the vampire movie, and this is part 8. This week's episode is sponsored by $20 Patreon subscriber John Cairns, and in this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we are going to be exploring the last Dracula adaptation of the series. This is Francis Ford Coppola's movie from 1992. This will be a spoilerific discussion, so if you haven't seen the movie, give yourself a treat. It's so much fun. Go and watch it before listening to our discussion. So, as I mentioned, this will be the last Dracula adaptation. It's been a long 7 weeks of discussing just Dracula movies, but this is going to be the last one we're going to explore in depth. Later on in the second half of this episode, I'm going to be joined by none other than Brad Hanson, who is going to be recommending a whole bunch of other Dracula movies from the last 30 or so years, just in case you want any additional Dracula recommendations. So loads of stuff to cover today. Let's get straight into it. I sat down with friend of the pod and the UK editor of Den of Geek, Rosie Fletcher, to discuss Bram Stoker's Dracula in depth. Enjoy. Hi, Rosie.
Hi.
Hi. So it's lovely to have you back, and we're talking all about vampires, obviously, this series. So I'd love to ask you, first of all, are you a fan of vampire movies?
I'm a fan of some vampire movies. I mean, I know that's a terrible answer, but the same with any kind of subgenre. Obviously, there are high points and low points. Mm-hmm. But as we always discuss, it's really only worth talking about the high points.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some really, really good vampire movies. Yeah. And I do think that as a creature, it lends itself to lots of different interpretations, which I like.
It does, doesn't it? Like, it really feels like more than a lot of other monsters, like zombies, for example. Like, zombies kind of feel like, on the whole, they're firmly rooted in horror. Vampires can kind of go anywhere and do anything, it feels like, especially in this day and age, you know?
And vampires lend themselves to being heroes out or anti-heroes just as much. So in a way, vampires are particularly good because they are scary, but also potentially, but also sort of represent eternal life and like a lot of sex and dark thoughts and these sorts of things. And also that, like, I mean, again, there's a massive range of aesthetics in the vampire lore, but it can lend itself to some like very iconic looks and things like that.
Yeah, you're so right. Vampire must be the sexiest monster in horror, right? I mean, like...
Well, yes. So I'm going to say yes, or possibly werewolf.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But...
Yeah.
we aren't talking about Twilight today. But I do think that, yes. So vampires are the kind of clean, cold, everlasting love kind of sexy, and werewolves are the kind of down and dirty, beastly,
a bit
kind
more
of
primal.
Exactly.
That's so true. I remember the late great Charlie Albright on this podcast talking about how he thought vampires were really unsexy because they were too clean, too mannered, and he actually said, "I prefer a zombie." It's like each to their own, Charlie.
Bit weird.
Yeah, exactly. I love it, but that's true, and they're majestic, they're well mannered, they're erudite, right? Again, like this is all quite interesting tropes for a monster, isn't
This is
it?
very true. And I know we'll get onto it in a bit because obviously we're talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula today. But when we do get onto it, it's worth talking about the fact that, of course, this particular iteration of Dracula is both.
Right.
You know?
Well, that is really interesting. Let me ask you about that. Dracula in general, we've talked a lot over the last few weeks about different Dracula adaptations, about the book, and trying to figure out exactly what it is about this character and this story that proves to be so popular again and again and again and again. I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that, and how important is it for Dracula to strike that balance, I suppose, as a character, as being sort of sexy and romantic, but also a scary monster, right? Like, that's quite a difficult kind of like knife's edge in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't pinpoint exactly why it is as popular as it is, but I guess if the book is almost like our modern blueprint for what a vampire is, then with that character, you at least have a bunch of rules that everybody already understands. You have a character with a backstory and a personality. And within that lore, his ability to shapeshift. And he both has the kind of the gentleman, sophisticated, exotic, certainly, persona, but also the beast within.
That's true.
And also he's kind of rich and sometimes kind of handsome. And so it's like, you have sort of like, it's a good place to explore some kind of darker thoughts, I think.
That's right. And I suppose even being killed by a vampire, or Dracula specifically, is kind of sexy, right? I mean, the one thing about a werewolf is that they will just maul you, whereas even being bitten by a vampire is in itself quite sexy, I suppose.
That is totally true. So would I rather be killed by a vampire, a werewolf, or a zombie? It's vampire. Like, because it also seems, because then, although we'll get onto this later, but then your corpse is left bloodless and emaciated, but you're still beautiful and young, and
it's so
not
true.
torn limb from limb. Your brains haven't been eaten.
And the vampire, I guess, generally is kind of really interesting in that regard, because it can represent different things, I suppose, through different ages. That idea of kind of disease or blood or exchanging fluids. Like, I feel like storytellers and filmmakers have kind of used those kind of tropes to different effects, through different decades and that kind of thing.
Well, that's right, and that's very interesting. Because in the film, and we'll get into it in a bit, but there's a whole scene with Anthony Hopkins' character talking about syphilis and diseases of the blood. But on the other hand, you have this idea of life begetting life, I suppose. Which, again, a bit of a weird thing to say, but is kind of comforting in a way. Because also we all know that we're all going to die, but it would be nice to believe that has some meaning. And so, even when it's Renfield eating the flies, it's like, well, if he can regenerate enough, or Lucy,
I know, and I think we'll talk about this probably with the film, particularly when we talk about Mina and Lucy, because there is also this idea that being a vampire is quite freeing, right, from the kind of like restrictions of whatever society you live in. There is this feeling that vampires are always kind of live how they want to live. They can be bisexual, pansexual. They kind of live on the fringes of society, and there's something quite cool and alluring about that too, right? Yeah,
I mean, that's totally true. And I think that the most clear kind of example of that is The Lost Boys, where it is like, sleep all day, party all night, it's fun being a vampire.
Exactly,
And it's like, God, that's attractive. And it's cool. So, I mean, I can see why this would live on in that way.
So there you go. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's very confusing, isn't it? It's like Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. So, Rosie, I mean, this is a bit silly because I keep asking people to give me a plot synopsis. It's kind of always the same plot synopsis, but set us up, first of all, with the story of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Sure. So Gary Oldman plays Vlad, Prince Vlad,
Yes.
who later becomes Count Dracula.
Dracula.
And he, in the, I want to say, 14th century, is a prince and goes off to war, leaving his beloved wife, Elisabetta, at home. Now, Elisabetta is wrongly informed that he's been killed, and in the throes of grief, lobs herself out of a window to her death. Then Vlad comes home, finds his dead bride, renounces God, and basically becomes this immortal, murderous creature. Then cut to several hundred years later, and Jonathan Harker, played by Keanu Reeves, is essentially an estate agent, I guess you'd call him.
Yeah.
So he's quite a junior one, and he is not wealthy and is called out to Transylvania to help the Count, who is buying a bunch of property in the UK, in London, in fact. And Jonathan Harker is betrothed to Mina Murray, who is played by Winona Ryder. And so he goes over to Dracula's castle and then has to stay there a month. I don't want to go down below because it's going to get boring if I just... But,
no, but that's
essentially, that's the setup. Then Gary Oldman comes to London and realises that Mina is the sort of reincarnation of his lost love, Elizabeth.
Yes.
And that's kind of where we go.
And that's the setup. Yeah, exactly. And I think what's really interesting, what's different about this particular version, like often people say, and people have talked about this already, I think Kim Newman said, as far as the big mainstream films go, this is maybe the most faithful adaptation of the book, which in some ways it is, but there is this added element of Dracula having that backstory, that love story from whatever it was, the 14th century, and Mina kind of almost embodying his lost love or something, and there's that extra romantic element that wasn't in the book, but other than that it is kind of blow by blow the same. So yeah, this man in Transylvania, then he comes to London and wreaks havoc. So yeah, what first of all, tell me a bit about your history with this film. Sort of, did you see it when it first came out back in the day?
Yes, I did. And so this film is really special to me.
Oh, okay.
Because it came out in 1992 and I was 14 that year. And so this is the very first 18 certificate movie that I ever saw at the cinema.
Oh my God, amazing.
So it was super special, right? So I was in the queue with my best mate, Ruth.
Yeah.
And we wanted to go and see this, but I think we had a backup if we couldn't get in, because we didn't have ID, because obviously we were 14.
Yeah.
But it was a different era in the 90s, let me say.
Did you have to fake your date of birth or anything? Did they ask you anything like that?
No, but we were fully ready to do so.
Yeah.
But what we were doing, so I honestly remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's like me and Ruth in this queue, and so trying not to appear nervous.
Yes.
We're like, okay, talk to me.
Playing it cool.
So we're like, and then and then she said, and then two for Dracula, please. Anyway, sorry, what were you saying?
Carry on.
And then he went to that. Okay, great. Here's money. No, then obviously, and then we're like, yes, get in.
That's so good. That's a really good method, actually, because you don't want to be like, two for Dracula, please. Yeah.
How old are you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm too busy having a conversation to answer how old I am, because I'm clearly old enough. That's how laissez-faire.
Talking about adult stuff.
Yeah, that. And that time we went to the pub or something. I don't know. What do you do when you're 18?
I love it.
So you're in. Oh my God. And I mean, it was amazing. And so I watched it again today. I watched it thinking, no wonder my mind was blown at 14.
Yeah.
It's so rich and sexy and sumptuous, and is really focused around these young women.
Yes.
There's a point where Lucy goes, I'm 20. I'm practically a hag.
So good. So good.
So good. And I probably at 14 was like, 20, hag.
Yeah.
But yes, so I loved it. And it really stuck with me. And some other friends my age also saw it, and we just all got a little bit obsessed with it. You know?
I can imagine, though. I love this movie too. And actually, for me, I sort of had the opposite experience when I first watched it as maybe I was about 16, 17, thinking I was really cool and wanting to watch loads of hardcore horror movies. For me, I almost had the opposite reaction to it, because I was like, oh great, Dracula, and like you say, an 18 certificate version of Dracula with loads of cool actors, made by Francis Ford Coppola. And I remember being like, oh, it's just loads of romance as a teenage boy, And I was like, it wasn't as scary or horrific as I wanted it to be at the time. And so, but over time, especially revisiting, I've watched it twice so far, over the last few months, and it just gets better and better for me, I think. And I now that I've watched so many Dracula adaptations, it's my favorite. I think it's just so fun. It's so fun, like it zips along, because it's it's like 2 hours, right? But it really feels like it zips along, and it's just so sort of sumptuous, isn't it?
It is.
It's sexy, and it's sumptuous, and it is creepy, and it's a bit camp at times, and it like ticks all of those boxes now for sort of adult me, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I think so Dracula is the hero in this film. He absolutely is. And
Yes.
and Mina the heroine.
Yes.
So you're not on Jonathan Harker's side, and every
No.
time he appears, you're like, oh god,
Yeah, it's so boring.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, she's gonna get stuck with him. Like, oh,
Yeah, and actually that is, I was talking to Rihanna about this, and Rihanna has said on the podcast before how much she hated Dracula the novel. She had to read it at school, and she talked about she hated it because she found Jonathan Harker such a boring male protagonist in that. And yeah, you're right, and these characters have been portrayed in different ways in different movies, but this movie really gets that right, I think, where actually you want to see Dracula on screen, basically.
Oh,
and they
every
give
minute.
you lots of Dracula in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, should we talk about that first? Let's talk about Gary Oldman as Dracula.
God, he's
shall
amazing,
we?
isn't he?
Amazing.
Yeah. And I hadn't remembered how much of the film is not in English.
Yeah.
Which I think was really interesting because, again, it just doesn't even. It's just like no, not
You're
English.
right. It hadn't even occurred to me until you just said that, but you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just just go with it,
Yeah.
and understand, because his otherness, his foreignness is also part of his attraction. So the very first time he meets Mina, so he's come to London and he's young again, and oh my god, his costume is amazing.
Those sunglasses.
Those round sunglasses, which
Yeah.
of course probably quite anachronistic, but
Yes, although there's something. Yeah, you're right. I was trying to think about that.
No,
I was
I
like,
don't
how
know.
accurate is that? I don't know. It almost looks a bit steampunk or something.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got the beautiful long hair and the amazing suit, and he's saying, see me,
Yeah.
getting her to notice him. And when he first talks to her, he says he asks for directions essentially because he's
Yeah.
not from there, and
Yeah.
and wants to understand London culture and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And she's really snippy with him.
She's really rude to begin with.
Super rude. She's like, well, if you want some culture, go to a museum.
Yeah.
Rude.
I know. I was like, what's wrong with cinema? Come on.
Yeah, right, exactly. And actually, that's a very interesting point that we should get onto.
Yeah.
About the whole cinema
Yes.
element. But yes, what he is immediately is exotic and
Yes.
other and sort of captivating and fascinating. And even when he's gross old him in the beginning, he sort of isn't.
No, and he's quite polite and kind, really,
Right.
considering how he looks.
And you talk about the book and how it's faithful, but his look is not at all.
No.
So in the book, he's pale and I think he has a moustache.
Yes.
And he wears a black suit or whatever. But
Yes.
of course, in this, he wears this amazing red robe, which was, I think, kabuki inspired, and has this incredible long
So good. His
hair, and Oldman had to shave the front of his head.
Yep.
So that his hairline was Dracula accurate. But again, it's you're both gross, but so fascinating that I need to look at you constantly all the
Yes.
time. You're exotic, and
Yes, and that's a really interesting kind of positive spin on that, because I think one of the things we talked about a lot with Dracula, probably even go back to the novel, is that there is a slight, not just slight, actually, there is a kind of xenophobic feel to that. This idea of this man from this other place, especially at the time, Eastern Europe, and, coming over to England and taking out English women. Essentially, that is what the story of the original is. And I think there is something a lot more nuanced, maybe, in a weird way.
Well, I think
in this version.
Yes, I think he is othered, but
Yes.
but in a way that is fetishized, if anything. So, in that early interaction one of the early interactions with Mina, she's describing his countryside in this
Yes.
incredibly erotic language. And he says to her something like, "Oh, you describe it as if you were there," and and so she's sort of starting to get, I guess, Elizabeth's memories or this sort of thing. But it's making, and he's saying, "Oh, it's the most beautiful place in the world." It's not it's all dark and scary and horrible.
Yeah.
It's lush and beautiful, and
Yeah, absolutely. Gary Oldman is and I remember thinking this as a kid in the 90s, he was this amazing actor that could disappear into roles. you would never. I don't think I would have ever known at that point that he was also the guy from True Romance. Like, he really seemed to just like transform in every role he did. Like, he's very good at that, isn't he? Like,
he really
we
is.
talked about before. Obviously Christopher Lee in Hammer, and he's amazing and he's got so much presence, but he is just Christopher Lee. Like, he just walks onto screen and he is Christopher Lee, and that's his thing. Even in The Wicker Man or whatever, like, he's that guy. Whereas Gary Oldman is much more of a chameleon actor, isn't he?
He really is.
You know,
and like, yes, he really is. And like, you know, I would have. I don't know. It's annoying that I can't really work out the timelines. I might have seen him in Sid and Nancy at that point, but would I have seen that at 14? Maybe not. But certainly. Which actually is a bit weird to me now, you had a bunch of 14-year-old girls going, right, I massively fancy Gary Oldman. And interestingly, so I was reading a little bit about this, but like Coppola cast Keanu because he wanted to appeal to young women, and Keanu was a big star.
Of course.
But none of us walked out fancying Keanu. We were all like... Yes, Gary Oldman, yes, please.
It's the least sexy Keanu has ever been, probably.
It really is. Like, yeah, but that apparently was the plan. Like, it's like, oh yeah, we've got to target the female demographic, and like, no, we're good with Oldman.
That's hilarious, isn't it? Yeah, he's really good in this. He's really magnetic, and he knows, again, it's that balance, isn't it, of being very sexy and alluring, whilst also being a little bit scary at times, also being kind of tragic and a bit sad
Super
at times
tragic
as well.
Well, and like, so, and Oldman's talked about how part of the reason he wanted to do it is because he wanted to say that line. It was something like, I've searched for you over oceans of time.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
good.
God.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, or I've crossed oceans of time to find you, or something like that. But just like, honestly, the most romantic line. Like, honestly, I challenge you to find anything more seductive.
Yes.
Like,
do you find him scary in this film? Is this film scary to you? Was it scary to 14-year-old you?
Well, I don't think it would have been scary to 14-year-old me, because 14-year-old me loved all that stuff. Like, that was the time in my life where it was like, I wanted nothing more than to just be completely immersed in everything like this. So no, I wouldn't have found it scary. Watching it again, there are some moments that are a bit scary. There's a moment where it's the way it's cut, but he drops down from the ceiling and he's kind of in a semi-bat form, which is like, whoop, like,
it's a good jump scare.
It is, yeah, it's a good jump scare.
Yeah.
But no, because to me this is not. It's definitely a horror movie, but like, but all the way through, all I want is for him and Mina to get together.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So it's a tragedy, really, because at the. I mean, can I spoil the end?
Yes.
So at the very end, and this is the one point that Jonathan actually has a moment of redemption. Yeah. So Quincy has killed, or just mortally wounded Dracula. Mina is devastated. Mina, who is part vampire herself at this point, and they're all and the blokes are gonna go and finish it off. And Jonathan says, "No, our work here is finished, and hers has only just begun."
Yeah,
which is the moment where you're like, "All right, Jonathan, you're all right. You're not so bad."
He lets her go.
He lets her
moment.
go.
Yeah.
So they go in and like have this final moment together. And he gets his redemption. He does. So he says it's finished, and then he says, "Give me peace," or something like that. She finally kills him, and we understand that he is reunited with his god, and she is saved. So she's not vampire anymore, because we understand from the mark on her head. So it's utterly tragic, because it's like those two probably should have been together. We understand that it's not sustainable for two people who have to constantly take other lives to live. But we're heartbroken. But also we're doubly heartbroken. Right? I was watching it again. That he then goes, and then Mina has to go back and be married to Jonathan. And it's just like, oh my God, like what a miserable thing to have seen and experienced. And she says, like, when I'm with him, I'm in one of her diary entries, like, I'm more alive than I've ever been. You know, you've tasted the forbidden fruit. You've known what it is like to be loved across oceans of time. Yeah. And now you got to go live with Jonathan.
Now she's got that like classic kind of English like kind of marriage. Like, it's really interesting, isn't it? I was always a little bit confused by the ending of that film. Like, is she a vampire? Is she going to stay a vampire? Is she going to, like, you know?
Well, so as I understood it, and also in some vampire lore, if you kill, like in Lost Boys, if you kill the sire, then you're all right. And I understood it because, you know, she's got the mark on her head because one of the blokes, can't remember which. Oh, in fact, Van Helsing. It would, has marked her with some sort of holy something, and that vanishes. And so, as I understand it, she's no longer a vampire. He's dead, properly dead, and
she can go back to normal.
She can go back to normal, but but you can't go back to normal because you've been loved by a vampire.
I love it. Yeah, it's true. Should we talk about the rest of the cast then as well? Because again, an amazing all-star cast. Some performances may be better than others, right? But like you say, we've got Winona Ryder, we've got Keanu Reeves, Anthony Hopkins, and Tom Waits, and what's his name? With Nail. What's his name? Richard E. Grant.
Yeah.
Like so many incredible people in this movie. What do you think of the rest of the cast generally?
And Sadie Frost as well. Who
Sadie
I'd like
Frost.
to mention because I think she's great. So for me, like, although yes, Winona's accent is a bit a bit all over the place, I think she's really good. And I think what you get from Mina and
Jonathan?
No,
Lucy
Westerman, is this sense of youth and and that felt quite convincing.
Yeah.
You know, she's looking through this book and it's got some pictures from the Kama Sutra.
I love that.
And she's a bit grossed out by it, but Lucy's like,
yeah,
you know, because Lucy's sort of more sexually aware, even though neither of them are sexually active. They're both, and like, you know, that friendship felt very convincing to me.
Yeah.
I really like Sadie Frost in it. I think,
she's great.
She's great. She's gorgeous. She's weird.
Yeah.
Though it did make me laugh. I was watching it. There's a scene where they're outside and it starts raining and they're like ridiculously delighted by the fact that it's raining and they're like, it's like, it's just a bit of a rain.
It's amazing.
Dude.
Is that also the moment when they kiss each other as well?
Yes, which is really just like, bit of a snog.
Yeah.
Move along.
That's just thrown in there at that moment. And I was like, is that because they're kind of under the thrall of Dracula, or is that just
maybe
they just fancied a little kiss at that point?
I don't know. It's really like quite passed over, isn't it?
Well, that's it. And I think all of the performances, you know, that's definitely something that this movie gets accused of, is being quite over the top, a bit melodrama, a bit camp, you know. And I read some of the original reviews of the film when it came out, and a lot of the critics, the kind of broadsheet critics, said Gary Oldman's amazing, the rest of the cast are terrible.
I mean, I don't agree with that.
No, I don't.
I mean,
either.
Tom Waits, that has got to be the most iconic Renfield.
Yes, it's such a good Renfield.
It is a great, crazy performance. And yes, and you see him dangling out the window with his straight jacket hanging off it. But it's wonderful. And I don't disagree that it's over the top, but I think that the whole film is over the top.
It feels deliberate, and even the performance styles, maybe, yes, the accents are a bit dodgy, but I think the performance styles are deliberate. I'm sure Francis Ford Coppola directed them to be that way. You know?
Yeah. So for me, the weaker points, and I love this film, so I don't want to be giving it a kicking.
Yeah.
But Reeves, it isn't.
Bless him.
That doesn't really work.
No,
unfortunately. And it isn't just the accent. It's that he looks surprised constantly throughout, and he also really he's just Bill and Ted him.
Well, that's so. That one of the other reviews I read from the Times said you can feel that almost every time he says a line, he wants to end it with the word "do," and it's like it's true. And then I couldn't unsee that once I read that. But yeah,
and it's just this. So I just didn't sympathise with Jonathan at all. I found him a terrible bore.
Terrible.
And the performance was dreadful. And like, sorry, Keanu, because Keanu is a international for us, but treasure now. We absolutely love the guy, but that just wasn't a great performance.
No.
And that's okay, but it does mean that the film loses a little bit of nuance, because then it does become a 100% tragedy, because we really, really just want Vlad and Mina to be together, and he's just the worst.
Yeah, you're right. And I do wonder how much of that was deliberate. I don't know. Apparently they originally offered the role to Christian Slater and he turned it down, and then they cast Keanu Reeves, which is interesting. I wonder how much better Christian Slater might have been in that role. But I
also had a massive crush on Christian Slater when I was at that age.
Well, it's totally that era, right? It's totally that era kind of heartthrob like Keanu Reeves. I can imagine it. But yeah, you're right. Like, I do think, is that Keanu's kind of slight lack of charisma, sorry Keanu, in that film, or is it deliberately so? Like that scene when they're getting married and the wedding is so depressing, right? It's so depressing, and it feels like that's the point again. Like you said, we're rooting 100% for her and Dracula, right, rather than her and Jonathan.
Definitely. Well, who can say? But having read around it, I don't think it was deliberate, because both Coppola and Reeves have said, well, you know,
it is what it is.
kind of. The cinematic equivalent of it is what it is. I'm also going to be slightly controversial, and I don't love Anthony Hopkins in it either.
No, I mean, this is something I've talked about a lot, all the way, even when I talked about the book with Adam, and we both went, Van Helsing is like not a very nice character actually, and a bit naff. And yeah, Anthony Hopkins, not great in this, I don't think. Yeah.
No. because I mean, maybe he wasn't over the top enough. I don't know what it was, but I just found him a bit of a, like, I just found him a bit annoying, bit weird. Didn't really understand the point of him. The scene early on when he's like sort of chatting up and then dancing with Mina was like, this is weird and uncomfortable.
Weird. And then they have that kiss, and that's weird.
And then, you know, but also, like, is he supposed to be funny? So, like, you know, Jonathan's like, oh no, Mina at the dinner table with Jonathan and him is like, did Lucy, how did she die? Did she suffer terribly? And he's like, yeah, she suffered terribly. Then we cut up her head, cut off her head and burnt her. And it's like, well, what, is that meant to be a joke? Like,
it was very strange. I get the feeling Anthony Hopkins kind of decides how he wants to do something, and then he's allowed to just do it, especially at that point in his career, right? I think that must have been just off the back of Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
He won an Oscar,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And you do get the feeling he's a little bit just like slightly phoning it in or something. I don't know, or slightly taking the piss.
Yeah, or maybe he's just like, oh, you know, I've just done a horror movie and won an Oscar for it, and like,
I'll do whatever, you know.
I don't know. I just didn't think he was that great in it.
There is one line that really made me laugh, and especially having watched lots of other adaptations, like there is that line where he says, what does he say? He says, like, I need post-mortem tools or something. And Dr. Seward says, oh my God, why? What are you going to do? You're going to perform post-mortem on her? And he goes, no, I'm going to cut off her head and put a stake through her heart. That's all. And like, he says it in a very like matter-of-fact throwaway way. And it did make me laugh because previously, up until this adaptation, that has been such a big moment. It's like, no, I'm going to cut off her head and put a stake through her heart. And that's like a big deal because it's like, that's the first reveal that he thinks she's a vampire. And he says it in such a throwaway, slightly piss-takey way in this. And it's funny. But yeah, I do think, like, what was the decision there behind that? It's weird.
Unsure.
Yeah.
Unsure. Because, yeah, so like, you know, you mentioned that it's a bit campy in a good way, I would argue.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, so like Sadie Frost, I honestly can't emphasize enough. I think she's just really good in it.
Really good.
Really going for it.
When she turns into a vampire, she's good as well.
Yeah. And she's absolutely gorgeous. And like, you know, so she's, I mean, obviously, I don't know exactly what age her and Winona were, but they were young.
Must have been very young.
And like, you know, this is quite like erotically charged.
Yeah.
I mean, I say quite, that's a bit of an understatement. It's extremely erotically charged. And he's kind of about that, which is another of the reasons I love it. But you see, you know, but the girls are giving these incredible performances, really committed. And obviously Oldman, and then Tom Waits in the background.
Yeah.
And I even love Richard E. Grant in it. I think he's really good. He's
great. Yeah, they're all really fun. And they're just, it feels like they're all just having a lot of fun as well.
Right. And the three potential suitors for Lucy are funny.
Really funny.
Like a funny little gang.
One of them was, what's his name, right? Carrie
Elwes from Princess Bride.
Yeah, Princess Bride. Amazing. And he knows how to ham it up. He knows how to ham it up, doesn't he? But it's really fun. All the performances are really fun. And also, what do you think of the female characters in this? Because I think there is something kind of, obviously, and we talked about this a bit before we started recording, and it is a bit male gazy on them, right? But there is something they're quite, particularly Lucy and then eventually Mina, these quite sexually liberated women, I suppose, in an era that this is set.
Yeah, so I think it sort of talks about that, doesn't it? So it's like, it's an era when women were not supposed to be sexually liberated. And you see that from Mina initially when she's seeing this image and she's like, yuck.
Yes.
You know, she's sort of grossed out by the concept of sex, whereas Lucy is not. But I think those characters, so while the film is a bit male gazy, it is also a bit female gazy. Yeah. So, while those two are sort of super sexualized in a kind of youthful way, I suppose, but like what we see is them kind of, well, the trouble is what we see is them learning, coming to terms with and embracing their sexuality. Yeah. Although I will say Lucy is raped by a beast. So, you know. Yeah. But the trouble is they're both punished for it. Well, yes. So like Lucy, obviously head cut off, stake through the heart, burned. And Mina, her love is taken from her, and she now has to live with Jonathan. And if that's not a punishment, I don't know what is.
Yeah, you're right, and it feels a bit like it's playing into the classic sort of slasher tropes, almost like the kind of final girl. You know, Mina being this like slightly more virtuous character that does ultimately get to survive. And Lucy being, again, that more sexually liberated character that dies first. Yeah,
and so there's a bit where Mina says, like, oh, Lucy is a virtuous girl.
Yes.
But I do wonder about her speaking her mind. Yeah. And it's just like, well, all right. But, you know, but the thing is, I'm not, like, I don't want to over-politicize this because even though, all right, if you boil it down, they do get punished. They have a nice time on the way. And we as an audience, like, we love them.
Yeah.
We're not on the side of the three boring blokes who Lucy's choosing between.
Well,
we don't care about that lot.
That's the thing. All of the men in it, other than Dracula, are so boring.
They are.
Right?
Well, or Renfield, not
or
boring.
creepy, basically. Like Renfield and even Van Helsing, right? They're either a bit weird and creepy or boring.
Or just really boring.
Yeah.
And we don't, and like, so all the three suitors for Lucy, okay, Lucy does obviously die, but like none of them are good enough for her.
No,
Not
and they're all
at
kind of the same.
It's just like, oh, you're the American one, you're the whatever, doctor one. Like, she's bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, her and Mina are way more exciting. Also, Monica Bellucci, by the way.
Where was Monica Bellucci?
Monica Bellucci, which I didn't realise was one of the brides.
No way.
Yes, way.
That's a pretty sexy scene.
Yeah,
to be fair,
sexy.
Oh my God. Yeah, the scene with the three brides with Keanu Reeves. Like,
right.
Yeah.
But
amazing.
even then, you're like, boring old Jonathan.
Yeah.
Sexy ladies.
Yeah.
Oh, and the bit where Dracula comes in and chases them away, and then they almost one of them becomes like a two-bodied.
Yes.
Whoa,
oh my God.
come on.
And we'll talk about that in a minute, like the look of this film, because that's really interesting as well. But I want to quickly, while we're on the topic of this kind of erotic thriller type vibe, like, this is an interesting time for horror, thriller, whatever you want to call it, right? Because, early 90s, often a lot of people in the horror community kind of talk about as being a bit of a dead zone for horror, because we were at the end of a lot of the really popular horror, whatever slasher franchises. We hadn't yet had movies like Scream and Blair Witch or whatever. And there's this kind of in-between period. But in amongst that, there were these kind of mainstream, high-end thriller horrors, I guess you'd call them, like Silence of the Lambs and the more erotic ones like Basic Instinct, Fatal Attraction. It is a kind of interesting time, right? And it feels like we don't really get films like this anymore,
No, absolutely. And while some of the gender politics in those films is not great, I really like that kind of movie. I do. And and like Wild Things,
yes, Wild Things, yeah. That was a very formative film for me. We're growing up. Yeah.
Was it now?
Was it now? Yes.
So I've got my Dracula. You can have your Wild Things.
Exactly.
But it was a really good, and Sliver. That those sorts of things. And I did love and Single White Female.
Yeah.
I really loved that era of thrillers, and I don't think we have have we lost the ability to be sexy?
I think
now?
we have. I think a lot of people have been talking about that recently. I've noticed it. A lot of people writing pieces on it. This idea that cinema is becoming slightly too puritanical, mainstream cinema at least, because this was very mainstream cinema, right? These were A-list stars.
Oh, and it made a boat of money.
Yeah, they made money. At the time, studios were not afraid to make 18 certificate movies with lots of sex and violence. And you're right, like, some of the sexual politics are a bit dodgy in most of them, probably, right? But also they were kind of really fun roles for women in these films too, right? I think, and like often way more interesting than the male roles. And I do I wonder whether that will ever come back. I don't know, but like I do feel like a lot of people kind of lamenting that kind of era of films at the moment.
Right. So we had the 50 Shades movies, which were terrible, obviously. I think there was a Polish one that came out recently that was similar. Maybe it wasn't Polish. Anyway, and there were some straight to streaming ones that are roundly speaking terrible. There was the Ben Affleck, Ana de Armas, which I don't want to say Deep Water. Is that
Deep Water? That's it. Which I haven't seen yet. You've
I have seen it, yeah, and it isn't very good, and it also isn't very sexy. Ana de Armas is sexy, but the film isn't, because there's no chemistry between them at all, and it's just and he's just such a grumpy kind of.
And that was made by, I believe, Adrian Lyne, right? Who made Fatal Attraction.
Yes.
So he was from that era.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of why I think people were a bit sad that wasn't a better story. Well, it wasn't even a bad story, actually. The story was kind of interesting. It just didn't play out very well. But that was at least trying to have a go at that kind of era. But I do wonder if you're absolutely right that people are sort of want everything to be a bit cleaner and not complicated, because Lucy and Mina, for example, what we're seeing is a lot of sort of erotic pleasure.
Yes.
Now, a lot of the time they're on their own, so it'll be like Lucy in bed, having some thoughts,
having some good times,
some good times on her own. And she was, young. And is it oh no, you can't ask women to do that now? And it's well,
I know. And it's so funny as well, those scenes where she's like, because all the men rush in and are like, oh my God, she needs help.
And she's like,
she's like, I'm fine.
She's like, she's all right. She's good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it probably does. I think there probably is also an element of that. I think, you know, people are a lot more consciously thinking about that these days, about, you know, how they portray these female characters and these kind of things, which is fair, because like we said, fair. You know, there's stuff about those movies that's not always great. And yeah, I think, and also I think it probably comes down to money too, right? I feel like I've heard a lot that people will, if they can, absolutely avoid the 18 certificate, you know, because it brings the audience numbers down, doesn't it?
Right, so, because we're not in an era where 14-year-old me can sneak into a cinema.
Exactly.
And that's what's wrong with the world, Mike.
Exactly. That's what's wrong with the world.
Because back in the day, like, it would not have hurt its box office figures, certainly in Canterbury, Kent.
Yes.
Where I grew up. Because, you know, it's like, all right, don't worry, the female 14-year-old demographic's all right.
They'll be fine. They'll be fine. Yeah, no, I think all of those factors come into it, definitely. And it is kind of a shame. And that's what makes this film kind of feel like a little time capsule of a bygone era almost.
But I do think it's a really special film.
Really good.
Like, I loved it then, but watching it again, nope, it's really special.
Well, let's talk about how this film looks too, because obviously Francis Ford Coppola, right? Again, like it goes back to that idea of this era being like filled with kind of these big names making these kind of quite weird films. And Francis Ford Coppola, obviously, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, like all these like big movies that he had made. What do you think of just the way he brings this story to life visually? You know,
it's exceptional, isn't it?
Yeah.
What I was noticing in the game, which I hadn't remembered before, is all the transitions.
Yeah.
Like, it's packed with these really, sometimes slightly odd, often really, really beautiful transitions. So maybe it'll be like a close-up of an iris, like
that's right,
and then that'll transition into a sunset or something like that.
Yes,
and there's a lot of them. Like, it does that all the way through.
Yeah,
but it's clever. It's a way for us to jump between locations, sometimes jump between eras, jump between characters, because there are multiple characters doing different things simultaneously. Because you've got Jonathan in Dracula's sex dungeon, while Lucy is having in the throes of lust over here in London. And it's a smart way, a smart and stylish way to do those kinds of cuts. And a lot of the time it is with eyes, which I loved. The costumes, we should definitely talk about.
Oh, because apparently he put a lot of money into the costumes. Like, that was one of his priorities, budget-wise, into the costumes. Again, it's just like, it's bringing the visuals to life, I think, isn't it? The costumes are amazing, right?
And it won the Oscar for the costumes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Dracula's armor at the beginning is incredible. Like, again, if you haven't seen it recently, even just have a look at a picture, because it's just this crazy kind of fox-eared,
that's right,
like shell-like, an amazing costume. I mean, we talked about it a bit, but like a lot of Oldman's outfits were amazing, but also like Lucy's wedding dress. Let's talk about that.
Oh, with the big neck thing.
The enormous ruffle where it's like her head's on a plate, essentially, which obviously is foreshadowing.
Yes.
You know, because later when they do, then it's like this torrents of blood coming out of her neck onto this white robe with this giant ruffle. Yeah. You know, but when she's having like, you know, she's in bed and is sleepwalking in the red... beautiful
that amazing
sort of
flowing
red gown, and she's being but of course Mina is in white, and Mina is chasing Lucy in red.
Well, that's it. The imagery is not subtle in that regard, right? But it's so good.
No,
it works.
But it's beautiful.
It's beautiful to look at. Mina, there's a moment. I think it's the scene when she bumps into him on the street and they go to the cinema, but she's wearing a sort of yellowish kind of suit, and again, like, you see her walking down the street, and she just stands out. And it's just like all of the visuals, they're kind of bold visuals, but they work.
Yeah,
you know?
And she wears a lot of greens.
Yeah, green, that's it. It's kind of green, yeah.
But then when she's with him on another evening, when they've already sort of fallen in love by this point, she's changed her hair. So her hair isn't, like, early on her hair's really pinned. Yes. And then, but once she's with him, her hair comes down and she's looking more like Elisabetta, but also looking freer, you know, and the tones of her outfits are darker. Like, it's not subtle, but it's
I love
beautifully used.
I love it. And, you know, this is, again, one of the things that previous adaptations of Dracula have been accused of, particularly the old Universal one. And obviously this was 1931, but they were taking... They basically took the stage adaptation of Dracula to the big screen, so everything felt very stagey. Dracula was like 1931, it was like fixed camera angles, people in a room, kind of looking out the window going, oh, look, I can see a bat. And it was all very kind of visually a bit boring, basically. And
yes.
It's like, oh my God, this couldn't be more the opposite to that.
Right, absolutely. Because if I'm right, almost all of this was practical effects and not VFX.
Yes, he wanted to, and again, going back to the idea of kind of cinema and Dracula, when Dracula was set, and actually one of the things about the book is that it focuses a lot on technology. It's not something that I kind of completely forgot about. There's a lot of emphasis on Mina's using a new typewriter and trains, and it actually is kind of trying to be quite up with the times in terms of technology, right? And I think this movie kind of is tapping into the era of technology, even with its film sort of devices, right? So I think Francis Ford Coppola wanted to use things like rear projections, and everything had to be in camera. There was no visual effects or anything, because I think he wanted to sort of pay tribute to kind of early cinema in that regard. And again, it just looks amazing, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, there's all these little flourishes that that sort of help you feel unsettled.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love the way Dracula's shadow is used.
Oh.
So sometimes it's really obvious.
Yeah.
So his shadow's doing something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's really subtle. Mm-hmm. It's just slightly behind his movement.
It's kind of uncanny. It doesn't... Yes, it
and then
almost is the same, but
there's
not
something
quite.
off about that. And it's
Yeah.
lovely. It's lovely. Or he uses... there are points where he makes the room look like it's shrinking slightly.
The wall, I only noticed that watching it a second time.
Yeah.
The walls are moving in the background, right? It's like, what? Amazing.
Yeah.
And again, it was all done in camera. He was, I think, apart from the only thing that was a visual effect is the green, smoke that comes into the room.
Right, and the blue lights towards the end.
The blue lights. But other than that, he insisted on everything being, in camera.
Yeah, and used lots of weird techniques holding the camera upside down or using funny angles and things like that to sort of be unsettling without being overt, to give you a feeling, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which it does.
It really does. He did a thing, and I can't remember. I'm going to get this wrong, in terms of the exact technique of how it's used, but it was something to do with what people like Georges Méliès did in the very beginning of cinema, where they would film the foreground and then put the film back through the camera and film it again to do the background, and there would be one matte on top of another kind of thing. So the scenes when Jonathan is on the train and you can see Dracula's face in the background in the window, again, that was all done practically as they would have done it at that time on film, kind of thing.
That's
which
amazing.
Is so cool, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why this film kind of has aged really well, right? It doesn't really look that dated in that regard, in a weird way.
No, I don't think it does at all. And in fact, watching it again, it feels like, this word is overused, but it does feel like kind of a masterpiece. It does.
Yeah.
It feels like such a complicated technical feat, but also such a complete movie in that every different element is being utilised to the last.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that, and this is the problem I've had with every Dracula, and this is just the story, I think it peaks in the first half. I love everything in Transylvania. I love, I Am Dracula and all of that stuff, the vampire women. There is a section in the middle when Van Helsing comes into it, and it's Van Helsing and his army of, men.
Boo.
Yeah, kind of, trying to figure out how to save Mina, and I don't think this is the fault of the film, but I think there is a slight dip for me in the middle there. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think that, but anytime Dracula and Mina are together is electric.
Yes.
Boo Van Helsing.
Yeah.
Boring.
He's really boring. Yeah.
And in fact, I like Richard E. Grant's character much more than I like Van Helsing's character. I thought he had more softness.
Yeah.
I like him as a performer anyway, but you sort of felt for him because he's trying to do something, but he's out of his depth. Mm-hmm. And the woman that he loves but is not betrothed to is behaving in ways that he, as a button-down man, can't understand. Yes. So, and that's quite interesting. Yes, I agree it dips, but that's quite an interesting thing when it's the three blokes and she's kiss me, and I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Yeah, and I think again inserting that subplot of Dracula and Mina being this kind of tragic couple, which is not part of the original novel, means that you get all of those much more electric moments with Dracula throughout, and it works. To
be honest, I think without that, I don't think this film would work for me at all.
No.
It would just been whatever, this is just a story that I've seen 100 times before, but to me, because it was this gorgeous, sumptuous romance that even at my old age, still find romantic, but certainly at 14 would be like, this is my absolute dream. Like, honestly, like, forget Twilight in terms of talking to young women, like, wowzers.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, but also not just young women. I'm saying that because I was a young female, but I imagine it wasn't that different for young. Well, I know 16-year-old you was a bit like boo romance. 16-year-old boys, maybe not. But yes, no, I totally agree. That's the thing. That is something that maybe we've lost a little bit. Like, I don't know, like these kind of like very overtly sexy films for women and for men or whoever, like I don't know, maybe like, and we talked about this before we started recording, maybe you get more of that now in TV than you do in film these days.
I mean, it's obviously completely apples and oranges, but like something like Euphoria, for example, does talk about sexuality quite a lot and in quite interesting ways.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think probably these days in general, I think TV is just a bit more groundbreaking.
It's a bit more bold, isn't it? Definitely.
It is.
So there you go. Anything else you want to mention on Dracula? Any other highlights or moments that you want to call out? It's just all so cool, isn't it? It's just such a cool movie.
It is. I really love it. I love the fact that at the beginning we see the live action version of the war, and then later when they go to the cinema, it's like the shadow puppet version, which is just a lovely callback.
I love the cinema sequence.
Yeah.
Like that was inserted, obviously that's not in the book, but I loved all of that and seeing the little films and the train coming into the station. And then there's a moment when you can see like women getting their boobs out on the old like film playing in the background as the love scene is happening and stuff. And again, all the imagery is so on the nose, but it's just great. I love it. I love it. It's so good.
Me too.
Yeah. And I guess final question about the film is like, and we've sort of touched upon this already, but how do you think it holds up? This film is this year, right? It's 30 years old. But how do you think it's sort of dated?
Honestly, I think it holds up way better than I could possibly have imagined. I think it's brilliant. And I think if you haven't seen it, like me, since you were young, go watch it again. I think you will find that it is honestly much better. Mm-hmm. It's so packed. Like, I came out of it feeling like, wow, God, that really was something. I wasn't wrong when I was 14. Like, this is actually genuinely beautiful. And yes, all right, Keanu Reeves, but get over that. Yeah. And it's just a wonderful piece of filmmaking.
Yeah. Do you know what? Like, the performances really did not bother me in it, because it feels like, yes, the accents, but like the performances feel in keeping with the whole film, and I completely agree with you. I think it's like I said, the best Dracula adaptation we've gotten. And I don't think it's been matched since. So there we go. We're going to wrap up shortly on this. But first of all, it's time to head over to the first Wild About Horror segment of our vampire series. Because, of course, Freudian cinephile Mary Wilde has plenty to say about Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Hey Mike, Mary Wilde calling. I'm so excited to contribute to the vampire series on evolution of horror. As symbols of lust and seduction, vampires are the quintessential Freudian subjects. So you can expect a lot of passionate and provocative interpretations from me in the coming Wild About Horror segments. First up, the 1992 release, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, based on the 1897 novel. Now, there's a lot that can be said about Jonathan and Mina Harker, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, and of course, Count Dracula himself. But what piques my interest most in this movie is the character of Lucy Westenra, played by Sadie Frost. The 19-year-old Lucy becomes Count Dracula's first English victim. She subsequently transforms into a vampire and is eventually destroyed. Lucy is eroticized much further in Coppola's adaptation than in her literary incarnation, becoming more coquettish and tempting. As a spoiled child of aristocracy, she talks with artlessness and frankness, bordering on the indecent, though at the same time remaining a kind-hearted and beautiful young woman. Unlike her friend Mina, who stays resolute, Lucy's nature is flirty and tantalizing. this is somehow linked to her downfall. She is a vibrant character, in touch with her sexuality and curious about romantic relations. Lucy's physical attractiveness captivates her suitors, and she displays a comfort and playfulness about her desirability that Mina feels nervous about. Lucy's only apparent interest in life is choosing a husband out of her 3 suitors: the wealthy nobleman Arthur Holmwood, the American adventurer Quincy Morris, and the psychologist Dr. John Seward. She sleepwalks and develops anemia. Her body becomes frail and her canine teeth grow longer. Dr. Van Helsing suspects Dracula's involvement in her illness and suggests that Lucy's suitors give her blood transfusions. Tragically, Lucy dies. After her burial, she rises from the grave as a vampire and is discovered attacking a small child. Van Helsing and the suitors work together to destroy the undead Lucy. She behaves seductively and beckons Arthur to come closer for a kiss. He is nearly tricked but is pulled back by the others. He stabs Lucy through the heart with a wooden stake. They decapitate her. When Dracula was written and published, there was a big cultural preoccupation about the rise of the so-called New Woman, a term coined in the late 19th century. The New Woman is more independent and free. She wants to take advantage of the increased opportunities becoming available to the female gender. In Victorian times, a woman was expected to be pure and meek, playing the part of the submissive wife and doting mother. Many people were horrified by the idea of this daring new woman. They perceived her as too intellectual and too sexual. Lucy Westenra becoming Dracula's victim has prompted debates about her status in the story. Was she merely a helpless victim, too dependent upon men and susceptible to Dracula's influence? Or did she embody the predicament of the new woman, expressing sexual desire that was too modern and overwhelming, willingly surrendering herself to what is perceived as a wayward lifestyle, allegorized as vampirism? Effectively, Lucy has desires that cannot be met. In the novel, she complains about being forced to choose between her 3 suitors and wishes she could marry all of them. Stoker amplifies Lucy's insatiability to a monstrous volume when he describes her undead self as a wanton creature of ravenous sexual appetite. In this demonic state, Lucy poses a precarious hazard to men and their fragile self-control, and therefore must be conquered. Her death returns her to a more harmless state, attaching a look of innocence on her face that pacifies men. From a theoretical standpoint, it's possible to invoke the concept of the phallus to understand Lucy's function in this story more deeply. Jacques Lacan generally prefers the term phallus instead of penis because what concerns psychoanalytic theory is not the male genital in its biological reality, but the role that this organ plays in fantasy. Of course, the phallus in Lacanian theory carries the connotation of a physical penis, but it is not exclusively that. The focus is rather on the phallus as a signifier of lack and sexual difference. In Lacan's system, the phallus is a particularly privileged signifier, inaugurating the process of signification itself. The imaginary phallus is perceived in the pre-Oedipal phase by the child as the object of the mother's desire, as that which she longs for beyond the child, who then seeks to identify with this object. Through trying to satisfy the mother's desire, the child identifies with the object that it presumes the mother has lost and attempts to become that object for her. The phallus is imaginary in the sense that it is associated in the child's mind with an actual object that has disappeared and can be recovered. Eventually, the child realizes that it is not identical to or the sole object of the mother's desire, as her desire is directed elsewhere. The imaginary phallus is what the child assumes someone must have in order for them to be the object of the mother's desire. What Freud called castration, therefore, is a symbolic process that involves the child's recognition of themselves as lacking something, the phallus. My argument is that Lucy understands at a fundamental level that as a young woman living in the Victorian era, she is excluded from the many prospects that men routinely enjoy. Confronting the abject misery associated with this lack, Lucy decides, albeit unconsciously, to seize and embody the lost object of desire, the phallus, to hold on to the side of power in society by becoming a penetrating force in her own right. She does this by co-opting the capacity of the vampire, not merely consuming, but indeed voraciously devouring all the pleasures that arouse her interest. Throughout Coppola's film, there are focal points representing the force of phallic penetration as an elevated condition. Examples include Mina's pornographic Arabian Nights book containing illustrations of penis and vagina sex, Lucy teasing Quincy Morris by playing with his massive Bowie knife, lingering shots of needles piercing Lucy's arms for blood transfusion, Count Dracula's teeth sinking in the flesh of Lucy's neck, Arthur driving a stake through Lucy's heart. Lucy's new woman status coalesces on the theoretical function of penetration. Her curiosity about sex finds expression in the encounter with Count Dracula, however deadly it is. A young Victorian woman, driven by carnal desires, transgresses the boundaries of civilization. Acting on erotic impulses would, in this framework, lead to a radical deterioration of her body in the imagination of a repressed society. Lucy hooking up with the demonic monster is simply code for her pre-existing lustful tendencies, for which she will inevitably be punished. Dracula is merely a convenient scapegoat to distract from unacceptable female desire for sexual penetration. That is to say, not just penis and vagina sex, but actually penetrating society as an erotic force to be reckoned with. Lucy's untainted status is conserved precisely because Vlad the Impaler is named as the sole attacker. This naive explanation reassures us that phallic female desire does not and cannot exist. Until next time.
A big thank you to the wonderful Mary Wilde. It's so great to have her back. So don't forget, if you want to hear more from Mary, more of Mary's takes on horror and other genre movies, you can sign up to her Patreon, patreon.com/Mary Wilde. And don't forget to follow her on all the socials at Psychstar. Okay, Rosie, we're going to wrap up shortly, but I've got to finish by asking you, in this incredible vampire subgenre, what's your favourite? What's your favourite vampire movie?
Do you know what? I don't really know. I know that's an annoying answer. I think probably Near Dark.
Oh, yes.
I really love Near Dark.
What a film.
I think that just does so many different things. I think Near Dark is scary, super violent, has an element of romance to it.
Yep.
Also has that Western vibe, is brutal.
Yeah. Also very cool.
But it's cool.
Right?
It is cool.
Yeah.
So I really like Near Dark. This one, Bram Stoker's Dracula, is always going to have a place in my heart.
Yeah.
I really think it's special. Let the White One In is brilliant, of course.
Yes.
Oh, and Lost Boys. No, Lost Boys. Come on, it's got to be Lost Boys. No, it's got to be Lost Boys.
It's so hard. There's a lot of good ones.
Lost Boys is... So this for the romance, Midnight Mass and Near Dark for the grit.
Yes.
But for the pure, like if you were like, which one shall we put on now?
Yeah.
The answer is Lost Boys.
Yeah. It's the one you can just keep going back to, isn't it?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, Rosie, thank you so much. This has been so much fun to chat about, and just tell people where they can find like more of you out there, more of your writing and that kind of thing.
Yes. So I'm the UK editor of Den of Geek. So if you head over to denofgeek.com, you will see lots of me wanging on about this, that and the other.
Yes.
But also Den of Geek has a quarterly magazine, which I am the print editor of. And you can now subscribe in the UK. Hooray.
Amazing.
Because you couldn't for the first 6 months of the year, but you can now. So if you want a lovely in your hand print product, and we've got one coming out for San Diego in July. Can't tell you too much about it, but it's going to be pretty amazing.
You always have like beautiful covers to those magazines.
I'm very proud of that.
That's
Thank
so
you
nice.
very much.
No worries.
Thank you,
Rosie,
Mike.
thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot.
A big thank you to the wonderful Rosie Fletcher. That was such a fun movie to discuss. So shortly we're going to get into the second half of this week's episode, in which Brad and I list through some Dracula also-rans. But first of all, I want to take a moment to thank this week's sponsor. That's $20 Patreon subscriber John Cairns. John sent me a lovely little message, which I'll read out now. He says, "Hi Mike, I just wanted to start by saying thanks for creating this podcast. I started listening to Evolution of Horror in December 2020. It was a very difficult time for me personally. Work was tough and we were on the verge of another lockdown in the UK. Discovering EOH and listening to the show provided me with some relief and made the difficult winter a little bit easier. I've now been listening ever since and really admire how much the podcast has grown ever since I started listening. I dragged my girlfriend along to the EOH Presents screening of Dashcam a few weeks ago and we had a great time. I managed to say hi to you and Louise Blaine on the stairs before the screening. Sorry about ambushing you. I don't have anything I'm personally involved with to give a shout out to, but I would love to give an enthusiastic recommendation to Shadows at the Door, the podcast. They have recently released an adaptation of The Picture of Dorian Gray and specialise in M.R. James style quiet horror. Ooh, thank you so much for that recommendation and for that lovely message, John Cairns. I am absolutely going to check out Shadows at the Door because I love a bit of quiet horror. So consider me subscribed to that podcast. And it was lovely. I do remember you saying hello to me on the stairs at our Dashcam screening. You didn't ambush us at all. Me and Louise were actually recently just talking about how much we loved that evening because it was so great to meet so many of you guys and hang out with you in the bar. So thank you for coming and saying hello, and a huge thank you to John one more time for being a $20 Patreon subscriber. And if you want your own little dedicated segment like this, become an official Evolution of Horror sponsor. You can send me a message that includes anything you like. You can plug something, you can give a special shout out to somebody, a friend or family or loved one, or just drop me a little message about some of your favourite movies. Anything you like, I will read it in this middle section of an episode. So if you want to get involved, you've got to sign up to our Patreon at a $20 level. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. That's patreon.com/Evolution of Horror.
Now on BBC One, Screen One presents an unusual and sometimes disturbing film marking Halloween. Over the centuries, there have been countless reports of ghosts and ghouls, but the line between fact and fiction has always been unclear. Using the modern idiom of the outside broadcast, Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, Mike Smith and Craig Charles star in Ghostwatch.
That was a little clip you just heard there from none other than BBC's Ghostwatch from 1992. This is, I can't imagine there's anyone out there who doesn't know what this is, but this was the incredible TV play, I suppose you'd call it, that broadcast on Halloween night 30 years ago, and it absolutely scared the shit out of the UK. So much so that many people thought that it was real, that what they were seeing on TV was actually happening. It was kind of one of the earliest examples of a kind of found footage phenomenon akin to the Blair Witch Project in terms of the impact that it made, at least in the UK. It aired on Halloween night in 1992, and because of the controversy surrounding it and the insane reaction to it, it has never been broadcast again on the BBC. It's actually quite a difficult movie to actually get hold of and see. But as luck would have it, that is going to be the next Evolution of Horror Presents screening in London. So if you get yourself down to the Genesis Cinema on the 12th of July in London, we will be hosting a very special screening of Stephen Volk's Ghostwatch. It'll include a special introduction and then a live panel discussion after the film, in which I'm joined by friends of the pod and co-host to discuss this insanely good and influential TV movie in depth. So this is a very rare chance to see Ghostwatch, particularly on the big screen with an audience. And let me tell you something, it hasn't aged a day. It's still as terrifying as it was 30 years ago. So I'm really excited to give it another watch with an audience. So if you want to get yourself a ticket, they are on sale now. Our last screening, Dashcam, sold out. So if you want to get a ticket before they sell out, I would get in there quickly. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com/Genesis, and that will redirect you to the Genesis Cinema ticket page where you can grab your tickets for Ghostwatch. That's on the 12th of July. It's going to be starting at 6:30 p.m. in the evening, and it will be followed by a special panel discussion, and then we'll all hang out in the bar afterwards and discuss the film. I absolutely cannot wait. So if you are within reach of London, grab yourself a ticket while they last. evolutionofhorror.com/Genesis. Okay, let's hurtle into the second half of this week's discussion. As I mentioned, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992 is the last Dracula adaptation that we are going to discuss in depth. But of course, there are several, nay, hundreds more Dracula adaptations out there. So I thought I'd bring in Brad Hanson to give us a few quick-fire recommendations of other Dracula movies you can check out. So please enjoy mine and Brad Hanson's Dracula Also Rans. All right, hello and welcome back, Brad Hanson. Hi, Brad.
Hello, mate. Pleasure to be here.
Lovely to have you here. Welcome to the Vampire series. Let me ask you, first of all, are you a big vampire movie fan, Brad?
Not really, but you ask me this every season, and I seem to always say no.
I know. It's always great to have such a horror fan on the podcast.
Knows about them all, fucking hates them all.
Yeah, exactly. I gave you the lovely task of coming up with a little list of Dracula Also Rans, because there are so many Dracula films out there, right? I mean, even the list that you've created probably barely scratches the surface, right, of the amount of Dracula adaptations that are out there.
Well, the caveat being that these films have to be about Dracula or have Dracula featured in them. So if anyone comes and goes, "Where's 30 Days a Night?" I would say, shut the fuck up. That'll come later.
Exactly. There's plenty of time for that stuff. Yeah, exactly. These are only titles with Dracula as a character in them, and we've gone sort of fairly modern too, haven't we, as in like sort of from the last 20-30 years maybe.
I think the earliest film is 1979.
Okay,
because you also instructed me to stay away from Hammer. And
we've done all the Hammer Dracula films already. We've done all the Universal ones. There are a few international ones that we haven't done, but maybe there'll be time for that later on down the line. But these are mainly kind of some of the other Western Dracula movies, right, that we've not covered yet.
Yes.
So let's do it. Have we got an order for the list? Is it going chronologically?
Yeah, might as well.
Let's do it chronologically. Yeah. All right, so what's first on your list?
The first film I would like to talk about is from 1979, and it is called Love at First Bite.
His style is irresistible. His curiosity is irrepressible. And when he takes a bite out of the Big Apple, his appetite is insatiable. George Hamilton.
Is blood in your eyes.
And Artie Johnson as Renfield.
Finally, after 712 years, to have someone bite me again.
Love at First Bite. So this is directed by Stan Dragotti. Dracula and Renfield relocate to 70s New York in search of Cindy Sondheim, the reincarnation of Dracula's one true love, Mina Harker. So it's a fish out of water, enchanted-esque story of, you know, Dracula trying to cut it in the gritty, grimy streets of 70s New York where, hey, I'm walking here. And it's quite, you know, it's quite fun. We've got George Hamilton is playing Dracula in this particular adaptation. Richard Benjamin's Van Helsing. It's, you know, a campy, silly comedy about Dracula. That counts.
It does count, absolutely. I think it was Kim Newman when he was on the pod, he talked about how he went to the cinema and all within the space of 2 days, I think, he saw Nosferatu the Vampire, Werner Herzog, he saw Frank Langella, Dracula, and he saw Love at First Bite. They were all out basically in cinemas in the same week. And he said the one that played best to an audience by far was Love at First Bite. That was the one that everyone had the most fun with. So, yeah.
There you go.
So there you go. So that's Love at First Bite. Do we know if we can find that in the UK? Is that easy to watch?
It is difficult.
Oh, is it? Okay. One of those. One of those you might have to search for.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, there we go. So that's Love at First Bite. Okay. What else is on our list?
We're going to go 1987, directed by Fred Decker. It's an absolute childhood banger of mine. I'm sure it was a childhood banger of a lot of people's. It's The Monster Squad.
You know who to call when you have ghosts. But who do you call when you have monsters?
We're the Monster Squad. What's a squad? It's like Miami Vice, I think.
They're young and inexperienced.
Naughty virgin.
They're a bit disorganized.
Monsters are not real.
We don't know that, sir.
2,000-year-old dead guys do not get up and walk away by themselves.
But when strange things start happening in town...
There's a monster in my closet.
Ooh, look at that big, scary monster!
What's happening? You wait until the werewolf.
Silver bullet?
They're the only ones ready to do battle.
Something's out there that's killing people. And if it's monsters, nobody's gonna do a thing about it but us.
The creatures of the night.
Ooh, yeah, this is a banger, isn't it? Tell us about the Monster Squad.
So, Dracula and the Wolfman and the Mummy and Frankenstein and the Gilman. They're definitely not the creature from the Black Lagoon, but might be. They're in search of a powerful amulet that will grant them power to rule the world. But the Monster Squad, a group of Stand By Me-ish kids, are the only ones daring to stand in their way.
Great film.
Fucking great. Surprised it hasn't come up at any point in any of the other series.
I know, right? Maybe it will have to at some point down the line in like a monster series or something, but it is such a banger. And you're right, like I think so many of us probably grew up watching this as kids, right? It's like, it's a bit of a staple.
Well, yeah, I mean, things like the saying "Wolfman's got nards" is like forever emblazoned in my brain. And then obviously the star of the Monster Squad made a documentary which played at Fright Fest a few years ago called Wolfman's Got Nards.
I never saw that. Was that good?
No, I didn't see it either.
No.
But, you know.
Yeah, it rings a bell. It rings a bell. Oh, so there you go. Yeah, I mean, and it's great. I mean, like you say, it's not just Dracula, right? We've got all the other monsters going on in this movie as well. It's great fun.
Yeah, and it's once again, it's so 80s it hurts, but Fred Decker's a safe pair of hands, and this is, you know, a romp. It's a romp, isn't it? And it's not, you know, it's one that you could share with your kids because it's not, you know, very scary, and it gives them an education of these kind of mythic laws. I mean, that's how you and I grew up in sort of early 90s on video, I imagine, watching the Monster Squad, because it was one of them ones that your parents were like, oh, it's only a PG, I can't really say no to that. Come on.
It's great. It's a good, like, it's a sort of gateway horror, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so there you go. So that's the Monster Squad. You can't stream that for free anywhere, but you can rent it. So give it a little watch if you've never seen it. It's worth a watch. All right, what's next on your list?
Now, this is a very tiny, he plays a very tiny part, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. From 1988, directed by Anthony Hickok. It's Waxwork.
Oh,
It's 11:45. Let's go.
Imagine, if you will, an exhibit in fear.
It looks a little spooky, boys. You think we should do this?
A place that appeals to your deepest and darkest fantasies.
Ooh, scary.
Your fascination with ghosts, monsters, and the many unearthly elements of the supernatural.
Welcome to the Waxwork.
Look.
Now this is killed her.
Enjoy.
Wow, the glasses from Nutty Zombies from Hell.
Lose yourself in it.
Would you like a closer look?
Really?
But whatever you do, don't step over the rope.
So this is a wealthy slacker college student, Mark, and his new girlfriend, Sarah, and their friends are invited to a special showing of a mysterious wax museum, which displays 18 of the most evil men of all time, obviously.
Yes.
Although
Are you a fan of this one, Brad?
I fucking love a bit of waxwork. Like, this is another, this is like a Stevie's brain rot as well. Like, this is definitely his canon.
Yeah.
But this was very much a growing up one. I remember the VHS cover vividly. Yep. Obviously, this has got Zach Galligan in it. And Miles O'Keefe is playing Count Dracula in this one. Obviously famous for having oiled tits out in every swashbuckling Conan knockoff in the 1980s.
There you go.
But, you know, I think about what waxwork would be like in 2022 with 18 of the evilest men.
Like, oh my God.
Who's going to be in it? Who's making the cut?
I'm sure we could come up with a list of a few for sure.
How much are you stifling a Savile?
Oh no. Savile had to come up, didn't he? He had to come up.
It's now three for three on this podcast.
Anyone who's not a Patreon subscriber won't know, but Brad and I, along with Becky and Louise, we do our monthly fresh blood recommendations. And Jimmy Savile has come up in the last couple of episodes, hasn't he? For one reason or another.
Yeah, I'm now just forcing the issue. There was no need for that one to happen.
This is the new challenge for Brad now. Yeah, it's really fun. Anthony Hickox, right? The guy that did Hellraiser 3, I believe. The old CD Cenobites.
Yeah, it's the first thing you think of. CD Cenobites.
CD Cenobites. So there you go. You can't go wrong with that. So that's Waxwork from 1988. It looks like you can stream that on the UK on Shudder. So give it a watch.
Dracula's barely in it, but he's in it.
Dracula's barely in it, but it's a fun film anyway. So there you go. So that's Waxwork. All right, what's next, Bradley?
So we are now moving to 1994 with Mikel Almereda's Nadja.
Nights without sleep. Long nights in which the brain lights up like a big city.
I killed a fiend who is not dead. He's undead.
I want to change my life. I'll find someone. I'll be happy.
Ooh, okay. I don't think I know Nadja. Tell us about this one.
This is a bit of a Giles Edwards cut, this one.
Yeah.
I went above and beyond. In contemporary New York City, members of a dysfunctional family of vampires are trying to come to terms with each other and in the wake of their father's death, who happens to be Dracula. Meanwhile, they're being hunted by, you guessed it, Stan Helsing and his hapless nephew. It's good and evil, you know, the usual sort of thing. Nice. This is Peter Fonda is playing Dracula in this, but he's also playing Van Helsing.
Oh my God, amazing.
He's doing the Swinton Suspiria.
Yes.
And I mean, Jared Harris is in it as well. David Lynch is in it. David Lynch produced this film.
Holy shit.
And you're now thinking, oh, what the fuck have I been doing with my time?
That's like my bingo reference. This is like my Jimmy Savile is how many times can I mention David Lynch in any episode of this podcast?
Well, he produced this, and he is working as a morgue attendant in it. This director has always been around. He's a bit of a jobbing... his most famous film, I would say, is the film he did about with Ethan Hawke about Tesla. A couple of years ago. But he's just generally kind of a jobbing. But this was one of his first films, and it's apparently meant to be very good.
Oh, okay, so that's Nadja. I can't seem to even see it on Just Watch, so I don't know if it's available anywhere.
That's a very hard one to find.
It's a hard one. You might have to do a bit of searching if you want to track that down, although I might have to, especially, this is a good cast, and it's produced by David Lynch. I might have to give it a little watch. So there you go. So that's Nadja from 1994. What's next?
The only reason you're here, it's 1995, directed by Mel Brooks. It's Dracula. Dead and loving it.
What a film.
Vampires do exist. This one we face is unlike any other. He can change the most innocent of humans.
Oh, Jonathan, let me kiss you.
But Newsy, I'm British.
So are these.
Women are rendered powerless under his spell.
Stand up. Not you. Sit. You stand. No, sit. No, stand. Now, walk to the terrace door. Watch out!
His evil desire has no end.
She's alive?
She's Nosferatu.
She's Italian? Up there!
Make no mistake, he must be stopped.
When a lawyer shows up at a vampire's doorstep, he falls prey to his charms and joins him in search for fresh blood. Nice plug there.
Nice.
Enter Professor you-know-who, Van Helsing, who may be the only one able to vanquish the Count. So it's your typical vampire story, except it's written by Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
So it's very silly, and it's a bit crass, and it's a bit spicy, and it's a bit
is.
naughty. So
Yes.
when we first went into lockdown, March 2020, and it genuinely felt like the world was ending. Do you remember the kind of that fear that like I've never really experienced and will never really experience again, because if it does happen again, I'm used to it now.
Yes.
And my coping mechanism for that first couple of weeks of uncertainty and ambiguity was to watch as many spoof movies as possible. So I'm talking Top Secret, Airplane, Scary Movie, Silence of the Hams, Fatal Instinct, all of them.
Repossessed,
including obviously Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Yeah, it's a good one, right? I mean, to be fair, I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but I remember it's really fun.
There's something to do with piss in it, I remember. I only watched it 2 years ago, and I remember something about piss.
I remember a moment where Dracula is dancing with either Lucy or Mina, and their shadows are dancing, and then their shadows start having sex with each other. That's like the main bit I remember.
Oh, I wonder why you remember that.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, Leslie Nielsen, amazing. You can't go wrong, really. Okay, well, there you go. So that's Dracula Dead and Loving It. Again, this is terrible, but you can't actually stream it anywhere right now, so you'd need to find a DVD of it somewhere in your local CEX or something, probably, in order to see it.
50p, done.
Exactly, yeah. So there you go. That's Dracula Dead and Loving It. What's next?
Speaking of terrible, 1997, directed by Charles Band. That'll give you a good idea why. It's The Creeps.
In a hidden laboratory, a scientist gone mad has created a way to bring our oldest fears to life. You know their names. You know their faces. But you've never seen them like this.
So a mad scientist brings Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Mummy and Frankenstein's monster to life, but there's only a problem. They've ended up 3 foot tall. So Charles Band has cast lots of little people to play the 4 characters I just mentioned. And basically it's about this scientist. I've watched this very recently to remind myself, because I remember seeing it as a teenager. It stars... the guy that plays Dracula is a guy called Phil Fondacaro, who I remember very, very distinctly from Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Oh, let's look him up. Oh, yes. I remember him from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Yes, the little guy who... Yeah.
Roland?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I think that's what he was called.
Yeah.
So this film is fucking terrible, but fun. Like really stupid, but fun. It makes not like a sense. So basically, this guy's going into like universities and stealing first edition copies, like the original manuscripts of all these, because apparently that's the best way to get because you take the book and you put it in the machine he's made, and then it makes the monster that's in the book.
Fine.
But apparently to get like the best version of it, you need like the original source material. So he's got all these like fragile books and whatever.
Right.
But it fucks up anyway, in spite of all that. And as I say, it's like, haha, isn't this funny? Little Dracula, little Wolfman, little whatever. Amazing. And that is the film. What I will say is that the film actually has more references and sort of nods and odes to John Woo Jess Franco and Federico Fellini than you would ever anticipate there being.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. And it's Full Moon Pictures, is it?
Yeah.
I see.
So it will be available to watch on the extension that you can get on Amazon Prime.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got a DVD copy, which I think 88 Films released. They might have even done a Blu-ray as well, but it's 88.
Of course.
It's daft, but quite fun. As I say, and from like a film snob's perspective, it's like, why are you mentioning that for? Why is Fellini coming up?
I love it. That's great. Well, they've got to make their own fun with these movies. So I love it. That's great. So there you go. That's The Creeps. Yes, as Brad said, you can watch that for free if you subscribe to the Full Moon streaming service or find it on Blu-ray or DVD. All right, what's next on your list?
We're heading to 2000, which means we are in peak new metal territory.
Oh yeah.
Which, ergo, my bread and butter. This is a film that up until this week I had never seen, but thanks to this fucking thing I've now watched it. It's Patrick Lussier's Dracula 2000.
Passcode decrypted, accessing, security shutting down, cracked.
For centuries, a secret has been buried beneath the streets of London.
You don't build this kind of security without a gold mine to hide.
Something ageless.
What the hell is that?
The Holy Grail, the Golden Fleece, the crown jewels, whatever it is, it's inside.
Something powerful. Something beyond your deepest fears.
What just happened in there?
He is what they stole.
Who?
Dracula. Not myth. He's real. I assure you.
For some reason, this one has been brought up a couple of times, I think, on the podcast already. And is this the one where, spoiler alert, Dracula turns out to be Judas Iscariot? Or is that a different film?
No, it's this one. And, and he's played by Jared Butler. A very young Jared Butler.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty bad, right?
It's pretty stinky, I won't lie to you. So Patrick Lussier is actually not a bad director.
Mm-hmm.
He did the My Bloody Valentine 3D remake.
Mm-hmm.
He made Drive Angry. He did, but he also did like White Noise 2 and The Prophecy 3. So there's no consistency to what he's been up to. This also spawned 2 sequels, Dracula 2002 and 2003. What I know what you're asking. Did they come out in 2002 and 2003?
Yeah.
The answer is no. Dracula 2002 came out in 2003. So you've already fucked the timeline.
This is terrible.
And then Dracula 3 came out in 2005. What are you doing? Fucking idiot. Anyway, I've only watched the first one.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'd never seen it. It's got fucking mad soundtrack, obviously, of shit new metal and metal bands from the early 2000s. So Monster Magnet feature fairly prominently. We've got Christopher Plummer as Van Helsing. Johnny Lee Miller's his mate, who has a great line where he says, "Never miss with an antiques dealer." and then there's a cast of like baddies, right? And it's like Omar Epps, Danny Masterson, Sean Patrick Thomas, Lachlan Monroe, and like
it's so early 2000s, isn't it? It's like brilliant.
I'm supposed to be taking these people as like international criminals that are like breaking in and stealing stuff. Yeah. But I'm like, I watched you fuck a pie. Like, I mean, it's not actually Jason Biggs, but they're all just fucking like, teen sex comedy people. I don't really understand what they were going for there.
This is hilarious. But go on.
It's an insane fucking cast. It doesn't make a lick of sense.
It's so and produced by Wes Craven, right? I remember them plastering all over the trailer and poster Wes Craven presents Dracula 2000, and it's one of those where I think he had the tiniest involvement, and they put his name all over it. But
you need to. I mean, Lucy is not a big draw now, to be honest. No, so he certainly wasn't back in 2000. But as I say, bless Gerard Butler, man. Bless him. He's trying his best, but I'll tell you what. The best thing that came out of it was it reminded me that Virgin Megastore used to exist.
Oh, Virgin Megastore. Yeah, good times.
Because it features fairly prominently in this, and I'm thinking, Dracula likes virgins.
Oh, nice. It's, oh my God. Dimension Films, Miramax, of course. Music by Marco Beltrami, who did the Scream score. You've got all the big hitters from the era involved in this one. But
and it stinks.
And it's
really
terrible. So there you go. That is Dracula 2000. Where did you stream that one, Brad? Was it legally?
I bought a DVD.
Oh, that's how committed you are.
Just go into your local CX and ask for the tap bin. You'll find it. To be honest, I didn't hate it. Like, I say it's because it is really bad, but as a way of spending like 95 minutes, an hour and 40 or whatever.
Yeah.
There are honestly worse ways you could spend it.
Yeah.
It's not altogether terrible.
Amazing. Well, there you go. So that's Dracula 2000. Yeah, you can rent it online, or you can pick up a DVD of that. All right, what's next?
This is one neither of us have seen, but I have to mention it because I really did try over the last week or so to try and source a copy of this, even naughtily, and I can't.
Wow.
It's very difficult to find. I'm sorry for even mentioning it, really, guys, but it's Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary, directed by Guy Maddin from 2002.
Yes, you told me about this, I think, the other day, and I've never heard of this.
So it's a cinematic version of the Royal Winnipeg Ballet's adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, filmed in a style reminiscent of the silent expressionist cinema of the early 20th century, complete with insert titles and monochrome photography. It uses dance to tell the story of the sinister but intriguing immigrant who preys upon young English women.
Wow. Okay, but sadly, you weren't actually able to track this down.
I can't find it. I know Kino Lorber have done an American release on DVD. That's it. It's hard to find. And this guy Maddin, is like a nutter, basically. He makes mad films. So he's most famously known for like The Forbidden Room and My Winnipeg. But he also made a weird version. I don't know if you remember this, but he played the LFF a little while ago. He made a version of Vertigo called The Green Fog, where he used clips from entirely different films to piece together the same narrative structure as Vertigo. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Like, he does mad shit.
Yeah, he's experimental, basically, isn't he? I do remember hearing about that, but not seeing it. But that sounds kind of interesting. And this Dracula sounds kind of interesting too, actually. I like the poster, the cover for it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
So if anyone can find it, or if anyone knows where to find it, email Mike, go in the discussion group,
exactly,
tweet it, because I couldn't find it. And I thought, sometimes you've got to be nefarious. And especially because when you look up the best Dracula films, it's sometimes right up there in the conversation as one of the best ever. Oh. But you can't fucking find it.
You can't find it. That's annoying. Oh, well, there you go. Well, if anyone has any luck, let us know. So that's Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary from 2002. Amazing. All right, what's next?
We're into big budget, heavy hitting stuff now. We're in 2004. We're directed by Stephen Sommers. We are, of course, Van Helsing.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
Van Helsing! You murderer!
Why can't you tell the world I work for you?
Because we do not exist.
My life, my job, my curse is to vanquish evil.
Also a film that's come up a few times so far this series, of course. Tell us about Van Helsing.
Famed monster slayer Gabriel Van Helsing is dispatched to Transylvania to assist the last of the Valerius bloodline in defeating Count Dracula. Anna Valerius reveals that Dracula has formed an unholy alliance with Dr. Frankenstein's monster and is hell-bent on exacting a centuries-old curse on her family.
Now, I remember seeing this in the cinema, but I remember it being very, very bad, and I haven't seen it since. What about you?
Similarly, I haven't watched it in maybe like 15 years, I would say. 15, 20.
Yeah,
50, let's say 15. It is available on Amazon Prime and Netflix, so there is really not a lot of reason why I shouldn't have rewatched it for this, other than I'm busy, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd rather rewatch The Creeps.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, because I do remember this being particularly bad. I think the studio at the time kind of had this a kind of new potential franchise in mind, right? That this could like spark a new series of Van Helsing versus different monsters, and it was a complete flop. Everyone hated it, and yeah, it just bombed.
I don't remember hating it that much. Like, I remember as a impressionable young man, I thought it was all right, because I think they're obviously coasting off of the Wolverine fame at this point that he's just garnered from X-Men.
Yeah,
and I think at the time it was not the worst thing I'd ever seen, but like it's when I look at it, I think of Jonah Hex.
Yes, exactly.
Just like failures, just bad old timey failures. But I would be interested to revisit it. But as I say, I couldn't be asked for this. Sorry.
No, it's Hugh Jackman, it's Kate Beckinsale, of course, who seem to be in a lot of movies like this at this point in time, right? And it's got that kind of look, even when you look at the poster, it's got that kind of mid-2000s sort of greyish, greenish CGI look to it, and it's just not very appealing, is it? That's the thing.
Well, yeah, because obviously Beckinsale was doing the Underworld films at the moment, which you would think when they did 8 of them, or however many they did, that Dracula would come up. I've got some news for you. He never does. So he's not. Underworld is not included in this. Although I'm sure when we do our vampire also rans.
Yes. But it has got its fans, though. Some people do love the Underworld series. Not me. No. Well, there you go. So that's Van Helsing. So you can stream that in all the places. You can stream it on Netflix. So if you want to give it a watch, it's right there for the taking. So that's Van Helsing. All right. What's next?
We're staying in 2004. We're having a chat with our friend David S. Goyer, who, has barely made any films, to be honest. And we're talking about the third in a rather large Marvel franchise called Blade Trinity.
It seems to me we can't get enough of our boogeymen. What's your take on all these rumors we've been hearing about vampires?
If vampires existed, don't you think we would have found them by now? People want to be concerned. You should focus in on characters like this sociopath that we've been pursuing.
He believes that he is out there slaying monsters.
Why can't you just be nice?
Because the world isn't nice.
Now, I am, can you believe, going to be covering Blade 1 and 2 in depth on the podcast, but not Blade Trinity, so this works out well. So tell us about Blade Trinity.
I love picking up the slack, mate. For years, Blade has fought against the vampires at the cover of night, as we all know, in underground blood orgies and Guillermo del Toro good shit. But now he's in the crosshairs of the FBI for some reason. So together with Abigail and Hannibal, 2 definitely trained Night Stalkers, Blade is going to have to go to the fucking patient zero of this fucking vampire's curse. And that is, of course, none other than Dracula himself.
Indeed, yes. Dominic Purcell, I believe, right? Playing Count Dracula in this film.
He goes by Drake at the beginning because he's down with the kids. He's like, what's up, I'm Drake. And then at the end, he's like, oh, by the way, I'm Dracula. Like it's some kind of massive mystical surprise.
Yep. It's generally thought of as the worst in the Blade series, of course, isn't it? Although I'm just looking now at the cast. It's quite an impressive cast, actually, isn't it? Ryan Reynolds, Parker Posey, Jessica Biel, Natasha Lyonne. Yeah, like some quite cool people.
There's some weird, there's like an indie comedy streak in this, right? Because you've also got John Michael Higgins and Parker Posey, obviously people that would work with Christopher Guest quite a lot.
Yeah.
And Patton Oswalt's in it.
Yeah.
Also, Triple H is in it.
Triple H!
Time to play the game!
Oh, again, it's like we're so firmly in 2004, aren't we? I love it.
Wrestling's relevant.
Yeah.
But this is also where Ryan Reynolds really kind of came out as a film star. Because obviously he'd been famous off of the back of Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. Which used to be shown on Trouble. Remember Trouble TV?
Oh, loved Trouble. Yeah.
Bit of hang time, working together. Me and my friends hang time. And this is like he's like a really wisecracking. He's the comedic foil. But I do remember very distinctly at the end he calls someone a cunt.
What? In this film?
One of the jokes at the end, he calls her. I think he calls her like a thunder cunt.
Cock juggling thunder cunt.
Amazing. I love that. Because I remember thinking this movie was like, compared to the first two, it was only like a 12A or something, and it was like a lot more
it's definitely a 12A or a 15.
Yeah.
They managed to get one of them in there.
Incredible. There you go.
I don't hate Blade Trinity at all.
No.
I had quite a lot of fun with it as a kid.
Yeah. I'm exactly the same. I remember finding it quite a lot of fun. I was quite a fan of all three Blade films. And yeah, again, haven't seen it probably since 2004, so I don't know how it holds up. But at the time, I remember it being quite a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So there you go. That's Blade Trinity. You can rent that, or you can stream it on Now TV or Sky Movies as well. So there you go. What's next?
We're going animated. We're going 2012. We're going, of course, to Hotel Transylvania.
Welcome to Hotel Transylvania.
Do not disturb. Do not disturb. Do not disturb.
Human free since 1898.
I love this guy.
Hello? A human. What is this place?
Love it. Who'd have thought, we'd be talking about an animated Adam Sandler film on this podcast. Here we are.
Look how far this podcast has fallen.
Yes. Look how low we stoop now.
Yes. Now, you mentioned to me that, I believe it was Kevin Lyons told you that Adam Sandler...
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether this featured on the actual episode itself.
It did, actually. I believe it was Kim Newman. Yeah,
Kim
Newman.
Sorry, Kim. Sorry, babe. Kim Newman says... If for those who haven't listened to that episode yet or whatever, that Adam Sandler has played Dracula more times than Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, he has. He has. Incredible. In fact, he is one of the more prolific Dracula actors of recent years, which is hilarious, right? But yeah, these films are pretty popular. How many of them are there all together now? Is it 4 of them?
There are 4, and Sandler's done the voice for 3. On the most recent one, Transformania, or Transformania, or whatever it is, went straight to Amazon Prime, and there's no Sandler.
There you go. I've never seen it. Have you seen the original Hotel Transylvania?
I don't know where this has come up in conversation before, but I've seen 2, 3, and 4.
Oh yeah,
but I've never seen the original Hotel Transylvania, and I don't know why.
But you know, they're apparently really good fun. Kids love them. You know,
they're all right. They're fart jokes and silly shit. And they one time they go on a cruise, another this sounds like the fucking Fresh Blood non-horror section again.
It does.
And there's a bee.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, we've mentioned them. They're done. There's nothing else to say about them. They're kids' films about Dracula running a hotel.
Exactly. And it is a good kind of example of the way in which this monster has changed, right? I mean, I guess we've had kind of kids' vampires for a while now, but, the fact that the most prolific and I guess maybe most commercially successful Dracula of the last decade or two is an animated kids version, right?
Yeah, because I'm trying to think if there's any monster itself that has retained its credibility.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think at a certain point, they're always rife for parody or for this. Even, I mean, obviously the famous one is Kruger, from going from like a fucking terrifying monster to like, hey kids, call me up for your sleepover.
Yeah. Even the Babadook became a queer icon, and he was only in one film.
He pivoted within the same film. But I'm trying to think if there's anything that's retained it's without it becoming a joke or a meme. And Dracula certainly is, because the problem with Dracula is he is kind of ripe for parody, because he is a camp loner that lives in a big house and preys on women and men, but mostly women.
Exactly. So and you can have a lot of fun with it, and kids recognize it because of like the Sesame Street characters or whatever anyway, right?
Forgot about him.
So that's it. I think it's kind of it's appealing for kids as well, that kind of character. So there you go. Hotel Transylvania, if there's any fans of kids horror.
Can I get a whoop whoop?
Yeah, it's streaming on Netflix Kids, and you can also rent it in all the other places as well. So give it a watch. And Adam Sandler, he's pretty good when he wants to be,
He was good in Hustle recently.
Yeah, there you go. Was that the basketball film?
Yeah.
I've heard it's good. Yeah.
Good.
All right, so there you go. So that's Hotel Transylvania. What's next on the list?
We're staying in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about my favourite director of all time.
Oh, God, of course we are.
We're talking about Dracula 3D.
You must know what I am. Nosferatu.
Nina! Thank you. How was your trip?
I am Count Dracula.
I've never seen this, but even the poster just looks brilliantly terrible. Tell us about Dracula 3D.
I'm going to try not to cry. Jonathan Harker visits an exotic castle. You know the story. Count Dracula's there. He's entranced. And then Mina's there. And Van Helsing's there. So it's the usual story. We've got Thomas Kretschmann playing Dracula. We've got Rutger Hauer playing Abraham Van Helsing. Of course, we have Asia Argento in it because
of course
Dario Argento at a certain point was like, if I can't feel my own daughter's tits, I'm not making a movie.
Oh, God.
And this is by far the worst Argento film by a country mile. It
wow.
is unilaterally, no redeeming features, terrible.
Oh,
there'd been quite a gap in his filmography at this point. He came back with this 3D fucking bullshit.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that Argento has made all hits, no misses. He's missed a fair few times. Just look at his 90s work. But even his 90s stuff has merit value.
Mm-hmm.
Even scenes where you're like, that banged. The rest of his shit, but that banged. This has got nothing. This upset me terribly.
Yeah,
because I'm like, who are you? And then obviously, Dark Glasses is a new film. Obviously, there's a 10-year gap between this and Dark Glasses. He hasn't done anything since.
Has he not? Wow.
Nah.
So this was actually his last film until Dark Glasses.
So because obviously he's getting on.
Yeah,
he looks fucking rough. If Vortex is anything to go by.
Oh yeah.
But I'm so glad he's now made Dark Glasses because if he does die now, he doesn't go out on this.
Yes,
that's all that matters. He doesn't finish on this because this is upsettingly bad.
oh dear. Well, maybe it's because of maybe he was overexcited by the 3D element and then just forgot to make it good or something.
He's like, I can objectify my own daughter in a different dimension.
In 3D? Oh my God. Oh dear. Well, there you go. So that's Dario Argento's Dracula 3D from 2012. And if you want, you can rent it online in Amazon and all the other places and check it out.
Good luck. Godspeed.
Good luck and Godspeed. There we go. All right. What's next?
This is it.
This is it. Good.
Good. I can't be fucking arsed.
We can put an end to this.
Like a wounded dog. And much like a wounded dog, we're going out with a bang.
Yep.
And a whimper. It's 2014's Dracula Untold.
My father was a great man. A hero, so they say. Sometimes the world doesn't need another hero. Sometimes what it needs is a monster.
So this is directed by Gary Shaw. Vlad Tepes is a great hero, and when he learned... So this is basically about how Vlad the Impaler became Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically, it was very much inspired by, like, firstly, like, let's make everything grey and boring.
Yeah,
but also,
classic.
like, the kind of 300 stylization that Zack Snyder unfortunately popularized in the kind of mid-2000s.
Yeah.
This stars Luke Evans as Dracula Vlad. We got Dominic Cooper. We got Charles Dance, obviously. Does he? True or false, Charles Dance?
Does he?
Does he? But we got Paul Kaye. And it's really, really fucking shit. I've given it 1.5 out of 5. Watched it a day before my birthday in 2014. Never watched it since. Will never watch it again. Didn't watch it for this. It's fucking
really boring.
It's fucking boring and rubbish, but it is only 90 minutes long.
It's a reboot of Dracula. They thought it would be a good idea to create an origin story for Dracula. In this adaptation, Dracula is the monster alter ego of historical figure Vlad the Impaler. And it's played by, like you say, Luke Evans, and it's really boring, and like you say, it's got those kind of horrible sort of pseudo 300 visuals to it as well, and it's just all a bit bleh, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Was this around the same time as well when there was a Frankenstein film?
Yeah,
do you remember Victor Frankenstein?
Victor Frankenstein with Daniel Radcliffe.
Yes.
And
James McAvoy.
James McAvoy, yeah.
Also
that was
pretty bad.
That was terrible. And also I Frankenstein came out around there.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which, remember that bus siding that they got the poster wrong, so it said I Franken Rankin.
Amazing. Oh dear. Well, there you go. That really did go out on a bit of a whimper, didn't it? That's Dracula.
Don't lie, mate.
Dracula Untold. You can rent that in all the streaming places if you want to pay for it. So there you go. And that's it for our Dracula films, is it? And that's it for our list.
Well, that's the ones I'm prepared to talk about. I'm sure, as always, someone will be like, oh my God, you didn't mention the Hungarian?
Yes.
The Hungarian Dracula film that only 3 people have ever seen. I'm one of them. And to that, I will say, I'm very sorry.
Let me run through a couple of TV adaptations of Dracula.
Nothing to do with me.
So I want to start by recommending, this is one that has been mentioned on the podcast a few times already. This is the BBC version called Count Dracula from 1977.
Welcome to my house, Mr. Harker. Come freely, go safely.
Count Dracula?
I am Count Dracula. Will you come in?
So I've never seen this one, but I know it's been mentioned by both Kevin Lyons and Kim Newman as being, I think, pretty much the most faithful adaptation of the book. So it's quite long, and it was, I don't know if it was a mini-series or it was a kind of made-for-TV film, but it looks as though you can see the whole thing on YouTube. I think it's all on YouTube if you look up Count Dracula 1977. Directed by Philip Saville, and it's got Louis Jourdan playing the Count in this one. I have yet to see it, but I think what sounds interesting about it is that it's the one that everyone has said is the most faithful adaptation of the book. So if you want to see the book really kind of taken to the screen, the small screen in this case, then check out Dracula 1977, the BBC version. I've also got to recommend Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? Because of course I do. We are going to be doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer later on in the series, but there is one particular episode called Buffy versus Dracula.
So let me get this straight. You're Dracula. The guy, the Count.
I am.
And you're sure this isn't just some fanboy thing? Because I fought more than a couple pimply, overweight vamps that call themselves Lestat.
You know who I am. As I would know without question that you are Buffy Summers.
You've heard of me.
Naturally. You are known throughout the world.
Nah. Really?
So this is quite fun. This is the season premiere of the 5th season of Buffy, and as the title suggests, Buffy meets the Count, Dracula. And of course, it's done in this very kind of postmodern, Joss Whedon, knowing, quite ironic kind of way. So Buffy sort of meets Dracula, she knows who he is, she's like, wow, amazing, and it has lots of fun kind of playing with the tropes as well. So you get, a funny scene where Giles falls into the pit of the vampire brides, and Xander becomes kind of his Renfield in a way. He becomes this kind of like bug-eating manservant and everything. So it kind of pokes at the tropes, and it kind of does a really sort of, a very kind of Joss Whedon-y, clever, modern adaptation of the story that's kind of set within the framework of Buffy and Sunnydale. It's great fun. So I would give that a watch if you are a Buffy fan. And actually, it's pretty much a standalone episode. So even if you don't follow Buffy, you can probably watch Buffy versus Dracula just on its own and still follow what's going on. So that's Buffy versus Dracula. There was also another BBC adaptation of Dracula in 2013. This was a 10-episode series starring Jonathan Rhys-Meyers.
Alexander Grayson.
Jonathan Harker. This is my most lovely friend, Mina Murray.
Mina.
I swear.
We've met. I was thinking exactly the same thing.
So this is kind of interesting. This was produced by the producers of Downton Abbey, and I think the plan was for this to actually be a kind of longer-running series, but it was cancelled after its first season. And it feels like it's kind of taken elements of Dracula, but it's kind of made it slightly more epic and kind of expanded the mythology and the lore. It almost sounds a bit Game of Thronesy from its premise. So after being revived by a mysterious figure through the blood of a graveyard thief, Dracula arrives in London posing as Alexander Grayson, an American entrepreneur who claims to bring modern science to Victorian society. But in reality, he seeks revenge on the Order of the Dragon, a power-hungry organisation that ruined his life centuries earlier. His plans are complicated when he becomes fascinated with Mina Murray, a woman who seems to be a reincarnation of his dead wife. So there's a slight connection there to the Francis Ford Coppola movie, where there is this idea that Mina is a kind of reincarnation of Vlad the Impaler's, dead lover or whatever. So it's kind of taken elements from certain adaptations. It's obviously taken characters and sort of broad strokes from the book, but I think it's turned it into something kind of bigger. It wasn't hugely successful, sadly. I didn't get a chance to see it, but I've heard from a lot of people that it wasn't great and a little bit forgettable. So it only lasted one season before it was cancelled. But that's Dracula from 2013, starring Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. And finally then, I think we should finish by talking about the recent BBC Dracula adaptation. This was the 3-part series in 2020, created by Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, and it starred Claes Bang as the Count.
He's a very persuasive man, the Count.
He's a monster.
One might almost say seductive.
This is devilry. It's worse than that. It is the devil.
You have no idea.
Did you watch this one, Brad, when it was on?
Please.
No. It's kind of like it had some interesting stuff about it. It's 3 episodes. The first episode takes place in 1897, and it's very much a kind of gothic setting, quite close to the original. The second one is all set on the Demeter, the ship, and it kind of slightly goes off in its own direction. And then the third one, which is the controversial one, is it suddenly jumps forward to the year 2022, and Dracula has emerged in modern day London, and Dracula's using Tinder to hunt down and find his victims. It's pretty bad.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and there you go. So, I mean, not a lot of great ones to mention, but that's kind of why we reeled them off quickly and haven't covered any of these in depth, really, right? But what is it, Brad, if I was to ask you one favourite from your list of films there, which one would you most recommend?
The Monster Squad.
Very good shout, actually. I think that is the best one. I'd go with you on that. And I'd also say Dracula Dead and Loving It, because, why not? Leslie Nielsen. Why not? Lovely. Well, Brad, thank you for dropping in to do these quick fire recommendations. But you will be back later on in the series for like a proper vampire also rans as well. A meatier discussion, I'm sure, later on in the series.
I've got some sights to show you, motherfuckers, later.
Can't wait. I cannot wait. Until then, just tell people where they can find you online.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at @HadBranson.
Lovely. Brad, thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my 2 brilliant guests, Brad Hanson and Rosie Fletcher. So please do get in touch. What did you think of this week's episode? What are your thoughts on Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula adaptation? And when it comes to other Dracula also rans, is there anything we missed? Anything you'd like to recommend and throw into the mix? Please do get in touch. You can email us, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, there are 2 places you can go. You can join our Evolution of Horror Discord, or you can sign up to the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast financially and get treated to weekly regular bonus episodes, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. This week, me and Adam Robinson were discussing the latest season of of Inside Number 9, the brilliant horror anthology show. And next week, for $10 donors, we're going to be continuing our Legends of Horror mini-season. I'm joined by Louise Blaine to discuss the work of James Wan and Lee Whannell, and we're going to be discussing Insidious in depth. So if you want to hear all of that and more, sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast places, and if you get a spare minute, we'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever pod app you use, as that really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, on to next week then. And now, finally, 9 weeks into the vampire series, we're finished with Dracula and we're moving on to other vampires. So, next week, I'm going to be joined by a friend of the pod, film producer Jen Handorf, and we're going back to the early 1970s and back to Hammer horror. But this time, we're going to be talking Britt Ekland, boobs, and lesbian vampires, because next week, we're going to be discussing The Vampire Lovers from 1970 and Twins of Evil from 1971. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.